The ledger entry was barely legible, scrawled in ink that had faded to the color of dried blood over the course of a century. It was found in the archives of a bank in New Orleans in 1934, tucked inside a foreclosure file for a property that no one had dared to inhabit for 50 years. The entry was dated October 14, 1812. It read simply, "Purchased one male. Cyrus, age approx 40, lame in left leg, sullen demeanor, price, $300, note, seller advised caution." $300. In the booming slave economy of 1812 Louisiana, where a strong field hand could command $1,200 and a skilled artisan $2,000, $300 was the price of a mule or a child too young to work. It was a price that screamed damaged goods. It was a price that should have been a warning. But Henri Delacroix, a sugar planter desperate to replace labor lost to a yellow fever outbreak, saw only a bargain. He didn't ask why Cyrus was so cheap. He didn't ask about the plantation in Saint-Domingue where Cyrus had lived before the Revolution. He didn't ask about the scar that ran from the man's hairline to his jaw, or the peculiar way the other enslaved men in the holding pen refused to look him in the eye. Delacroix bought the bargain. He loaded his $300 purchase onto a wagon bound for his estate, L'Ombre, the Shadow, on the banks of the Mississippi. He thought he had made a shrewd financial decision. By Christmas of that same year, 17 people would be dead. The plantation house would be a smoking ruin, and the name Cyrus would be whispered with a terror that made grown men check the locks on their doors twice. This is the story of the rebellion that history tried to forget, not a war of armies, but a war of one man against a system that thought it could own him. The year 1812 was a time of chaos in Louisiana. The United States had just declared war on Great Britain. British warships prowled the Gulf of Mexico. The memory of the 1811 German coast uprising, the largest slave revolt in American history, was still fresh, a raw wound in the psyche of the white planter class. Heads had been put on pikes along the river road just a year earlier. The atmosphere was thick with paranoia. Henri Delacroix was a man who believed he could control chaos through discipline. L'Ombre was a mid-sized plantation, producing sugar cane and indigo. Delacroix prided himself on his scientific management. He kept meticulous records of food rations, work hours, and punishments. He believed that if you squeezed a human being hard enough, you could extract profit like juice from a cane stalk. When Cyrus arrived, he was assigned to the sugar house. His lame leg made him unsuitable for the grueling pace of the cutting fields, but his hands were strong, and he possessed a strange, quiet intelligence. The sugar house was dangerous work, feeding cane into massive grinding rollers, boiling syrup in open kettles where one slip meant a horrific death. It was hot, loud, and brutal. But Cyrus didn't seem to mind the heat. In fact, the other workers noticed something unsettling. Cyrus didn't sweat, or rather, he didn't seem to exert himself. He moved with an economy of motion that bordered on the unnatural. And he watched. While other enslaved workers kept their heads down, terrified of the overseer's whip, Cyrus watched the machinery. He watched the overseer, a brutal man named Silas Thorne. He watched the schedules. He watched the way the wind blew smoke from the chimneys. And he began to gather things. It started innocuously, a handful of herbs from the edge of the swamp, a stolen file from the blacksmith's shed, a few ounces of mercury scavenged from a broken thermometer in the curing shed. The first death happened on November 3rd. It was the plantation's prize bloodhound, a massive beast named Brutus that Silas Thorne used to track runaways. The dog was found dead in its kennel, no marks on it, simply stiff and cold, its eyes wide open. Thorne was furious. He blamed the heat or bad meat. He beat the kennel keeper, a young boy named Elijah. until Delacroix told him to stop because he was damaging property. Cyrus watched the beating from the door of the sugar house. He didn't flinch, he didn't look away, he just watched, his hand resting on the iron lever of the grinding machine. 2 days later, Silas Thorne fell ill. It wasn't a sudden poison, that would have been too obvious. It was a slow, agonizing decline. Thorne complained of stomach cramps, then visions. He claimed he saw snakes crawling in his bed. He screamed that the walls were bleeding. By the time the doctor arrived from New Orleans, Thorne was dead. His body twisted into a rictus of agony. The doctor diagnosed it as swamp fever, a catch-all term for things they couldn't explain. Delacroix promoted a new overseer, a man named Miller, and doubled the guard patrols. He sensed something was wrong, but he couldn't see it. He looked at his ledgers, he looked at the fields, he looked at the slaves. He looked right at Cyrus, the $300 cripple limping by with a bucket of water, and saw nothing. But the enslaved community saw. They saw how Cyrus whispered to the younger men in the quarters at night. They saw how he mixed powders in a hollowed-out gourd. They knew who he was, or at least what he was. In the hierarchy of the quarters, Cyrus was an Obeah man, a figure of spiritual power. But he was also something else, a tactician. He wasn't planning a mass uprising. He had seen the German coast uprising. He knew that marching with flags and drums only attracted artillery. Cyrus was planning an excision, a surgical removal of the plantation's command structure. The second phase began in early December. The War of 1812 was escalating. British agents were rumored to be moving through the bayous, offering arms to runaway slaves. Delacroix was distracted, spending his evenings at militia meetings, leaving the plantation management to his son, Julian, a 22-year-old with a cruel streak wider than the Mississippi. On December 12th, the sugar house exploded. It wasn't an accident. A pressure valve on the main boiler had been tampered with, filed down so expertly that it looked like metal fatigue. The explosion killed the new overseer, Miller, and 2 other white workmen who were inspecting the machinery. It also killed 3 enslaved workers who were unlucky enough to be close by. Chaos erupted. Fire spread to the cane fields. In the confusion, Delacroix raced from the main house, pistol in hand, shouting orders. He found the bucket brigade in disarray. He found the water barrels empty. Someone had drilled holes in the bottoms. And then the lights went out. Someone had cut the ropes to the plantation's main bell, the signal used to summon help from neighbors. Someone had doused the lanterns in the stable yard. Darkness descended on L'Ombre. And out of that darkness came the reckoning. This wasn't a mob, it was a hit squad. Cyrus had recruited 4 men, strong, silent, and totally committed. They moved through the smoke with knives and cane cutters. They didn't shout, they didn't chant for freedom. They worked. They took the house servants first, not to kill them, but to silence them. They bound and gagged the loyalists, the ones who would run to the master. Then, they moved into the main house. Henri Delacroix barricaded himself in the library with his wife and daughter. He had a musket and 2 pistols. He expected a frontal assault. He expected a mob beating down the door. Instead, he smelled smoke. They weren't coming in, they were sealing him in. Cyrus had ordered the doors nailed shut from the outside. He had piled cured tobacco, highly flammable, against the windows. Inside the house, panic set in, but then, a voice spoke from the other side of the library door. It was calm, accented, almost gentle. "Master Delacroix." "Who is that?" Delacroix screamed, aiming his pistol at the wood. "I'll kill you, I have the militia coming." "The militia is in New Orleans, Henri. The bell is dead, the road is blocked." Is that the cripple Cyrus?" "I am Cyrus. I am worth $300, Henri. Do you remember a bargain?" "What do you want? I'll give you money, I'll sign papers, you can go." "I don't want papers. Papers are for property. I want the balance paid." What balance? The lives. You bought a life for $300. That is an insult. A life is worth more. I have calculated the exchange rate. The fire took the house quickly, but the 17 lives weren't just the family. The true horror of that night, and the reason it was erased from the history books, was the methodical nature of the violence outside the house. Cyrus and his men hunted down every symbol of authority on the estate. The clerk who kept the whip tally, dead. The man who trained the dogs, dead. The merchant visiting to buy molasses, dead. But they also killed the drivers, the enslaved men who had been promoted to overseer assistants, the ones who had whipped their own people to gain favor. Cyrus spared no one who upheld the system. It was a purification. By dawn, 17 people lay dead. Henri Delacroix, his wife, his son Julien, his daughter, 2 overseers, 3 visiting merchants, and 8 enslaved drivers and loyalists who had tried to stop the revolt. When the neighbors finally arrived, alerted by the smoke, they found the plantation silent. The fire had burned itself out. The bodies were laid in a row in the front yard, covered with white sheets taken from the laundry line. And sitting on the porch of the ruined overseer's cottage was the ledger. It lay open to the page dated October 14, 1812, next to the entry for Cyrus, $300. Someone had written in fresh, bold ink. Paid in full. Cyrus was gone. The 4 men who helped him were gone. They vanished into the swamps of the Atchafalaya Basin. The official report filed by the West Feliciana Parish Sheriff stated that a boiler explosion and subsequent fire had destroyed Lombre. The deaths were attributed to the fire and Negro banditry. The mention of a coordinated, tactical strike by a $300 enslaved man was scrubbed from the record. Why? Because the white planters of 1812 could deal with a mob. They could deal with rage, but they could not deal with competence. They could not admit that a man they valued less than a mule had outsmarted them, outfought them, and judged them. To admit that Cyrus existed was to admit that the entire lie of their supremacy was fragile. So they buried the story. They burned the remaining records. Lombre was never rebuilt. The land was sold off in parcels, eventually becoming an unremarkable stretch of sugarcane fields. But in the oral histories of the local families, the descendants of the enslaved who survived that night, the story of the $300 general survived. They told the story of the man who didn't run, but waited, the man who turned the plantation into a trap. Cyrus was never caught. Some say he made it to Mexico. Some say he joined the Seminoles in Florida. But a letter found in 1845 in a collection of papers in Haiti suggests a different ending. It was written by a man named simply C, addressed to a free woman of color in New Orleans. It discussed the price of freedom. "They put a price on my head," the letter read. $300 they never understood. That was the price of the chain, not the man. The man was priceless, and the man is free. The rebellion of 1812 cost Henri Delacroix 17 lives, but it cost the institution of slavery something far more valuable, the illusion of safety. For decades after, when a planter in that parish looked at a quiet, limping field hand, he didn't just see a servant, he saw a ledger, he saw a balance due, and he wondered if the man holding the cane knife was doing the math. History is often a record of what people want us to remember, but the truth is usually hidden in the things they desperately want us to forget. What do you think? Was Cyrus a villain or a revolutionary? And how many other stories like this are hidden in the burnt archives of the American South? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to support our work uncovering these lost histories, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. We'll see you in the next video.